I made this video because there's something you need to do for your bees now come mid to late-ish summer. Now picture this, bear with me for just briefly, but there is a person that really wants to keep bees, and so they decide finally this is the year they're going to do it. They spend a ton of money on supplies, they watch countless videos, maybe they even take a class, join an association, and then they get their bees and they get overwhelmed. They are afraid of making a mistake. They don't know if they have found the queen yet. Should I double wax my foundation? They try to do everything perfect. But then a few months in, the hive gets bigger and larger. Maybe they get stung a couple of times and life happens. Summertime happens. They get busy. And the critical time when it is most important for the beekeeper to step in comes and they aren't there to do it. And all of that work and time and money that they put in the winter and spring doesn't matter because this one crucial time they weren't there to do what was needed to help their bees. And this is what this video is about, is that crucial time. So my last video was about when to harvest your honey. And then after you're done harvesting comes the not so fun part about beekeeping, but when the bees need you the most, which is that late summer treatment. We are talking about helping your bees. This can be the difference between them making it through winter, for those of you with a cold winter. My name is Larissa. This channel is called Beekeeping Made Simple, and I want to talk about summer, late summer beekeeping. We're going to talk about what you do after you harvest your honey, when to treat for varroa mites, why we treat for varroa mites, your different treatment options, the pros and cons to each, what I do as far as treating is concerned this time of year, and what you do with your honey and how to set up the hive so that the hive is in the best configuration possible for what's going on. Because the next video that I'm going to talk about next week is going to be about robbing and keeping your hive safe. Okay, so here is our beekeeping year. You get your bees. For most people, this is early spring. Here in Pennsylvania, mid-March, end of March, maybe early April. But what you see, no matter the time of year, is you see queen is laying, eggs in the hive, larva, pupa, those 3 stages of developing bees we call brood. Inside the hive, you're going to see the hive growing. You will see festooning, which is bees forming chains to build honeycomb. You will also do an inspection and you will see an increase in food and an increase in frames of brood. Phase 2. That's when the hive starts to get to max capacity, aka swarm season. For us here in PA, that would be end of May, early mid-June. Inside the hive, you're going to see queen cells. Not those teeny tiny little queen cells that may or may not have anything in them, but the queen cells that are a little bit bigger. They might even be capped. And when you remove them, you're going to find the next week that there are even more queen cells in the hive. You are still going to see an increase week to week. Looking at your inspection sheets, more honey and more frames of brood. You're going to find that it's hard to find your queen amongst the high population, and you are going to see your frames covered in bees. Roughly 500 per side of the frame for most hives. And then phase 3, the phase I am in right now, the stop. And it is mid-July, it is 90 degrees outside, it is hot, it is summertime. But for the bees, it is the start of their preparation for winter. The queen lays eggs for winter bees, and we want these winter bees to be healthy because these winter bees live months and they are the ones clustering up, producing heat and keeping that hive through the winter. A sign of this time is you are going to see the number of frames of honey and the number of frames of brood. You might see it decrease or you might just see it staying about the same. So we are ready to harvest our honey, and now we are ready to treat. It is mid-end of July and we have some options. We do have honey in the hive though, so we want to make sure we are using the right treatments. We also still have honey coming into the hive. We still have flowers blooming, and we still have a queen that is laying and brood. But you always want to treat every hive in your apiary. Unless a hive, month after month, has, when tested for mites, shown a mite level of 0 or 1, then you want to treat every hive in the apiary because, I don't know, growing up in the city, I've lived in row homes and twin houses. When the neighbor has an exterminator come, that's when all of the bugs come over to the houses next door. And it is the same thing with your beehives. You treat for varroa mites in half of your hives or 75% of the hives without the treatment are going to get flooded with varroa mites. So you treat the entire apiary at once. And it is always better to treat too early than too late, or to do anything as a beekeeper too early than too late. Your treatment options. For this late summer, you have formic acid, oxalic acid, and Apiguard are 3 great options for you. Formic acid and oxalic acid are organic in the United States. Apiguard is organic, I believe, in the European Union, but not the EPA in the United States does not recognize it as organic, although it is thymol-based, which comes from the thyme plant. So first, let's talk about formic acid. This is a very common and widely used treatment in the late summer by many beekeepers in the area that I am in, at least. And so the great thing about formic acid, in addition to it being organic, is that it not only kills, it kind of like fumigates the hive. And it not only kills the mites on the adult bees walking around the hive, but it does penetrate the walls, those beeswax walls of the pupa. And so it really, you can have it on the hive for just like 3 days, and it can really kill a ton of varroa mites in your hive. And that is a great thing because you should not have formic acid in the hive when temperatures are over 85 degrees Fahrenheit. Can cause your hive to go queenless. And so that is the downside to the formic acid, is the queenlessness of the hive. Older queens are more likely to die during this treatment than the younger queens. But if you use this in the late summer, this shouldn't be still early enough for you to buy another queen if needed. And that's why I don't recommend formic acid before you close your hive up for winter, because it is too late to requeen then. And I don't recommend it in the springtime because springtime is a crucial time for queens to be laying and when the hive needs to increase in population. And the strong smell of this formic acid can really mess with the queen's laying or cause her to stop laying temporarily, and you really don't want that. So if you ever want to use formic acid, the late summer is a great time to do it. You just have to find this few day period when the temperatures are going to be cool enough for you to do it. Here in Pennsylvania, there's enough days. It gets up into the 90s and the high 80s, but you will find that little gap when you can put it in the hive. The other downside to using formic acid is that it is not recommended on small hives or weak hives. So if your hive is just 1 brood box and the population is on the smaller side, maybe you just have like 4 frames of brood or so, this is not the treatment for you. However, we also have Apiguard. Apiguard is not organic, but it is plant derived, and you put it inside the hive. It can sustain higher temperatures. It can be in the hive when temperatures are outside are up to 105 degrees. Now, if your hives are in full sun, you're going to also want to take that into consideration. If it is a hot sunny day versus a cloudy day, you're not going to want it in the hives if it's even like 100 degrees Fahrenheit, but they're going to be in full sun on a sunny day. And Apiguard, I have never experienced the cause queen loss, but I have had hives abscond and completely take off when it's in the hive. So if you're looking at temperatures, according to the directions, over 77 degrees Fahrenheit, you want to use a half a dosage and replace it after a week, as opposed to using a full dosage and keeping it in for 2 weeks. Now, Apiguard does not work as fast as the formic acid, it cannot penetrate through the wax capping of the brood. And so that's why you need to keep it in the hive for longer. You can't put it in for just a few days like you can the formic acid. And then we have oxalic acid, which is also organic and another great mite treatment. The thing is that you don't want to use the same mite treatment all the time. And oxalic acid works really well in the late fall before you close your hive up for winter. So, and the reason why is because oxalic acid cannot penetrate through the brood cells, through that beeswax capping, the way formic acid can. And so if there is brood present, you're going to have to administer it every 6 or so days for about 4 treatments. In the fall, when there's no brood present, then you can just use a vaporizer or the dribble method and do it once, and you are done for the season. There are strips that are slow release that you can put inside the hive, and those would go into the hive as early as you can, as soon as you're done harvesting. Now, I also forgot to mention that oxalic acid and formic acid can both be in the hive if you have honey supers on. Although the formic acid works, it kind of like fumigates the hive, it is totally fine, they say, to put a honey super right on the hive. So if you are concerned about your hive swarming, not having enough room for the bees, you're concerned that there might still be a decent amount of honey coming in, you can, I would especially go with the formic acid. That being said, there is still a lot of honey coming in the hive. It might not be time for you to treat, and you might want to just hold off a little bit. There is a final treatment that you can use this time of year. It is called Apivar. It is considered a hard chemical. I don't recommend it this time of year because there has been a lot of resistance to the chemical in it, MITES, for years now. Depending on where you are, there might be the VARROA mites that are more resistant to it. But if you don't know, or even if the last time you used it, it worked well, it doesn't mean you never know when these MITES resistant mites are going to hit your hives. And so in the springtime, it's okay if you want to use it because you can always put in another treatment if needed later on. But this time of year, you really want to make sure your mite levels are lowered. And putting in a treatment that may or may not be effective or might not be as effective as you'd like just doesn't really sound like good planning. And of course, a lot of beekeepers treat before they close the hive up for fall. And this definitely is necessary because your hive is not then going to be treated for many months after that. But this is not enough to prevent your hive from dying over winter, just treating in the fall. It's going to be too late because if you haven't treated all year, or at the very least, if you haven't treated in the late summer, your winter bees have already hatched and their health is not going to really get much better if you treat in the late fall. Because if they had VARROA mites feeding off of them in the pupa stage, then they might not have even hatched in the first place. They were too weak, or they hatched with viruses and deformed wings, and killing the mites on the bees come October is not going to be enough. And I know this seems like a lot to treat, have these treatments very close to each other. But the thing is that you want to lower the mite levels for your winter bees to be healthy come the late summer. And then your bees are going to go through this really hard time when it is warm out, but there's not as many flowers blooming. And all of these animals are this is their last big opportunity to find as much food as possible and prepare for winter. And so you're going to find a lot of wasps and bees robbing. So when this robbing happens, bees are going to be coming to your hive. And a lot of these bees might have VARROA mites on them. And these VARROA mites can jump off of the back of the bees and onto the backs of the bees in your hive. And so especially hives with a lot of food in them are going to experience a lot of robbing, as well as some of the weaker hives that are just an easy target and don't have as many guard bees at their entrance. And so you're going to have beekeepers that aren't treating for VARROA mites, and you're going to have wild hives that don't have anyone treating for varroa mites in them. And these hives with high mite levels are going to come to your hive, and the mites are going to be jumping into your hive. And now your hive's mite levels get really high really fast. And so we treat one more time at the very end of the season to lower the hive's mite levels one last time before winter time comes and it's too cold to open the hive again. And now onto the honey. Okay, so we harvested honey, but we have to leave honey for the bees. There's, you know, at least 30 pounds, 30, 35 pounds you should be wanting to leave for your bees if you have a winter like we do here in Pennsylvania. In colder northern states, you might want to be leaving upwards to 50 pounds of honey for the bees. So what do we do with this honey in the hive when treating? Because even if you can put a treatment in the hive, it's not recommended according to a lot of these treatment options. Well, when it comes to what to do with the honey, there's two things you have to do. One, you have to consider the treatment you are using, and two, you have to look at your hive. I'm not going to say flip your brood boxes or, you know, there's no one set rule to what to do for your bees. You need to go with a logical mind and a clipboard and a pen and just tally what's in the hive and bring it all together. So first, there's the treatment. When it comes to formic acid, it's fumigating the hive. And although you don't want to have more than one super on the hive, because then the formic acid smell is not going to be as strong and it's not going to be so work as well, you can have one super on the hive. And when you put formic acid on the hive, the pad goes in between the brood boxes if you have two boxes. And so both of the brood boxes are being exposed to the fumes, and it is okay to have that one super up above it. You shouldn't have more than one super on your hive in addition to the honey frames in your brood boxes. Next, we have the Apiguard. Now with Apiguard, they say not to have supers on the hive. So what you want to do is look in your brood, and you want to see how much actual brood is there, because the population is going to be declining, and you want to see how much honey is actually in there. If you have frames that are, you want to keep your brood frames in the hive, but once you have your brood frames in the center, you want to take all of the honey and empty frames out, and you want to assess what you have. You want to get a little scale, weigh to see how much honey is on those frames in the brood boxes, and you want to put your frames of honey on either side of your brood. All those empty frames, the drawn out comb that is empty, you can put like 1 or 2 empty frames in with your brood, but then take the rest of those empty frames out that are just drawn out comb with no brood in them, and put the rest of the honey frames in between there from your supers. It is okay if you have a little bit of that gap because you have a shorter frame from a medium box in a deep box. And then you can do that with your second box. Now, when you put Apiguard in a hive, you need an empty super around the Apiguard. So it's not like formic acid where you put it in between your brood boxes, or they say to put like that little shallow shim over the box under the lid. They say to put an entire super around the hive, and that is an added benefit to using this Apiguard, is you don't need any kind of shims or anything or shallow boxes when using this. And there is tons of room. This tray is small, and if it is, you know, over 80 degrees Fahrenheit, you're probably going to be using a half a dose, which they say to just cut the tray in half with scissors. And so there is plenty of room on either side of the box. You want to put the tray in the center over the brood. There's plenty of room that you can put a couple of extra frames of honey in there. That's honey that you are going to be using as feed for your bees, and not honey that you're going to be consuming. So you want to make sure that you have enough honey in your hive to get them through winter. If you can't fit it all in your hives with the brood, then store it in a refrigerator or freezer during the treatment, and then you can put it back in the hive. It is really best, even once the treatment time is done to just keep it stored somewhere else to prevent your hive from getting a small hive beetle infestation or getting robbed too much. And then you can give it back to the bees when you are preparing it for winter come October. If you are concerned that your hive doesn't have enough room and that they could swarm, then putting a few empty frames in that super with your Apiguard will give the bees somewhere to build if they want to, somewhere to store honey if needed, but also allow you to properly set up the hive for Apiguard. If you have enough brood that you need 2 brood boxes and you're using Apiguard, then what I do is you just want all your brood together. And if it's not going to be all in one box because it's not enough space for all of your brood plus enough honey for them to sustain themselves, then you put all of the honey in the center of both boxes. You're stacking up on top of each other. And then you put the honey frames on the side and you put the Apiguard right above the uppermost brood box. You want the bees to be able to get to the Apiguard because what they do is they collect it and they carry it out of the hive. So you want them to get the thymol gel on their bodies and then have to go through the hive to get out. So you don't want upper entrances. You want them to go through the brood section to get out of the hive and to dispose of it. So you just want a solid block of brood. Whether that solid block of brood is a horizontal block in one brood box or it is a vertical tall stack of brood in 2 boxes up above each other, you just want bees to be able to hit the brood and go through the brood section and distribute this throughout the hive while they are trying to dispose of it. So understanding how these treatments work will really help you to understand how you need to set up your hive so that it is as effective as possible and where to put the honey. When it comes to oxalic acid, now if you are using the strips, then the honey super on top is fine, and you again want the brood close together. You don't want empty frames, you don't want a checkerboard with empty frames, you want it all close together so that it is getting to the brood. And if the brood starts to move away from the strips, then you want to move the strips. If you're using a vaporizer, then that vaporizer is in the hive for a very brief period of time. You want to do it early in the morning or later in the evening when most of the bees are back in the hive, and you can take that super off temporarily, put the vaporizer in the hive, and then you just put the super back on. But I always have a Sharpie marker with me and I mark all of the frames that are in the hive when I am treating. I don't care if it is okay for the treatment to be in the hive or not. I know that the formic acid does dissipate and it is not still in the comb, for very long, but this is just my personal preference and I like to keep track of these frames. These frames are what I consider feed frames, and these frames are in the hive during winter and they are in the hive for the bees. They are not in the hive for the beekeeper and for any kind of harvest. Are we hurting the bees by treating? There are people who do not like to treat because they don't like to expose themselves to the treatment, and there are people that don't want to expose the bees to this treatment. The way I look at it is if you are not going to treat, then you have to let the bees do what they do to lower their hive's varroa mite levels. And 2 very important ways that honeybees on their own lower varroa mite levels is by swarming and by creating drones. The drone pupa is where the varroa mites prefer to go to lay their eggs. And so having, foundationless frames in your brood boxes so they can build as much drone comb as they want to, not just like a frame or 2 here and there, or putting some medium frames into a deep box here and there to let a little bit of drone comb, but giving them the opportunity to make as much as they want to, and to allow them to swarm so that they are breaking the brood cycle in the hive are two crucial ways that honeybees lower varroa mite levels. If you are going to stop them from doing this, then if the hive's mite levels are at a point at which they should be lowered, I feel like it is our responsibility as a beekeeper to do so. You cannot say, oh, these bees should be able to lower varroa mite levels on their own, or nature would have them perish, because we are intervening and keeping them from defending themselves. And if you are going to intervene in these ways, then I feel like it is our responsibility to lower their mite levels with treatments. There are quite a few organic options that harsh chemicals are not necessary. And there are things that you can do to lower your hive's mite levels so you do not have to treat 3+ times a year. And if you still do have to treat that many times a year, despite natural treatment methods, natural integrated pest management techniques, then you really should move your bees to an area where there's not such a high concentration of bees and the swapping of varroa mites amongst the hives, which is what I found in Kona, where I was very close to many commercial beekeepers. But either way, you know, when I was a vegetarian, I found that people got really caught up in the fact that I said I was vegetarian. You know, it was like, oh, you can never eat meat or else you're a liar. And you know what? I just said I was vegetarian because it made it easier, because when I would be at a party or someone's house and I wasn't eating meat, then they wanted to know what my problem was. But I didn't have this cold, hard rule that I could never eat meat ever. It was just a choice I made to not have it a part of my daily diet or even weekly diet. And when it comes to treatment-free beekeeping, I feel like people think that they have to have this hard rule to declare themselves treatment-free or that they treat. And it doesn't have to be like that. You might read about treatment-free beekeeping and think it sounds great and make that decision that you want to be a treatment-free beekeeper. But it does not have to be that way. You can try your best to be a treatment-free beekeeper and work your way to being treatment-free. But there's nothing wrong with monitoring your varroa mite levels within the hive, knowing what's going on in the hive, and then making a decision once your hive's levels get very high as to the next step to take. This isn't a political party. You don't have to make any kind of declaration when you pick up your bees as to whether you're a treatment-free beekeeper or not. You can make decisions based off of facts and see how your bees do. And if a hive is becoming a breeding ground for varroa mites, then you should take some kind of action in order to stop this. Because it's only going to cause harm to the other hives in your apiary and other hives in the area. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to check out my last video about when to harvest honey and more of my other beekeeping videos. See you next time. And that is a good thing, because you should not have formic acid, oxalic acid. And that is a great thing, because you should not have formic acid